In our episodes, we discuss cases and topics that might be distressing or disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode in this series. Now, so far, we have been focusing on the 1980 unsolved murders of Rose Burkert and Roger Atkison, who were found dead in their hotel room bed at the Holiday Inn on September 13th, 1980. We have gone through that crime scene in as much detail as I possibly can. We've gone over the initial investigation, a timeline of Rose and Roger's last movements, possible suspects. We've gone through a lot so far. And for most of the investigation into their murders, I think the consensus had been that the person who murdered them was someone who knew them. The prevailing theory was that someone was out for revenge for the affair Rose and Roger were having. And statistically speaking, again, this makes absolute sense. You are far more likely to be murdered by someone you know than a complete stranger. But what if it wasn't someone they knew? What if it was a stranger and someone who had killed before? As I mentioned, I think 2 episodes ago, there had been a string of murders before and after Rose and Roger's that I think was really putting a lot of pressure on investigators. I can imagine the public was concerned for their safety. Well, investigators spent time trying to figure out if there were any links between Rose and Roger's murders and any of those other cases. And one of them that I think has a few very strong connections is the June 1980 murder of William Kyle. In today's episode, we are going to go through what we know about this murder and discuss the similarities and differences between the two cases. So let's get started. On Wednesday, June 25th, 1980, front desk workers at the Sheraton Motor Inn in Galesburg, Illinois, received a call. The call was from a woman, I don't have her name, but she was calling the motel because she couldn't get a hold of her husband, William Kyle. Kyle worked for Weyerhaeuser Co., which was a lumber firm based in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And William Kyle was a salesman and traveled often to speak with clients. Based on my research, he went to Galesburg, Illinois pretty frequently. One article published on June 26, 1980 in the Daily Review Atlas said Kyle actually went through Galesburg each week. Galesburg was about 2 hours southeast of Cedar Rapids in Illinois. Now, Kyle would check into the hotel and spend time calling clients, whether established ones or new clients, and I imagine he would also go and meet some of them in person. His wife, though, on this day hadn't heard from him. She had tried calling the room directly, but no one would pick up. And I don't have any information on how frequently, William Kyle and his wife would speak to each other, or when the last time she spoke with him was, but it seemed as though she was worried enough about her husband that she actually asked the front desk to go check on him. And I will say, some articles say he had just checked into the motel Tuesday afternoon. So this is the day before the wife is calling the front desk. So maybe the wife never received a call from him the night before to let her know that he had made it there all right. I'm just not sure. Either way, the Sheraton's manager, the assistant manager, and the head housekeeper went to room 217. And as a side note, this specifically is what makes me think that she was very concerned about him, because it wasn't just one front desk worker or a housekeeper going to knock on the door. It was a manager, an assistant manager, and a head housekeeper all going to the room, which to me seems pretty excessive. And I think speaks to maybe how concerned she was and how very much she wanted them to go check on him. But anyways, some articles state that they went to the room 217, around 12:45. Some of them say 1 p.m. Upon entering the room, they find a horrific scene. So let's go through what we know about this crime scene. It was brutal, and the room was a mess. The room had a similar layout to the hotel room Rose and Roger were found in. It had just one queen or double-sized bed, 2 nightstands on either side, a table and chairs to sit in, all of that. William Kyle's body was found halfway off the bed. His knees were on the floor and his torso was laying over top of the bed. But his torso and head were covered with the bed comforter. He had been struck in the head, neck, and shoulders with a heavy, sharp object. And though the murder weapon was never found, investigators believed it was a hatchet or something similar. Donald Butler, the captain of the detectives division at the time, said, quote, "The person or persons caused more injury than it would take to kill a man." There was blood on the floor and all over the wall above the bed. The pillow at the top of the bed, like where the pillow would normally be, was also absolutely soaked in blood. And the pillow was indented in, if that makes sense. And based on the amount of blood on the pillow, it appeared as though Kyle had been struck while lying in the bed with his head on the pillow. And it looks like he had then perhaps been pulled down to be in the position he was found in, or maybe he had moved himself into that position. I don't know, but based on how the pillow looks, it appears as though that is where he was initially struck. Now, just like Rose and Roger's hotel room, this hotel room that William Kyle was in was also a mess. An article published on June 26, 1980 in the Daily Review Atlas reads, quote, "The motel room was absolutely ransacked," according to Butler, who said drawers were pulled out and Kyle's personal belongings were scattered around the room. He added that the killer or killers had overlooked the victim's watch, but apparently had cleaned out his wallet. Speaking of the wallet, on the floor next to a table in the room, it looks like Kyle's wallet had been rifled through and the contents scattered on the floor. This is in addition to other items. In the photos I have of the crime scene, I can make out that there's a lot of papers, some shoes lying around, a pair of glasses, maybe a tie or some other articles of clothing. It's a mess. And it doesn't seem, again, like the kind of mess that someone would make if they were just an untidy person, if that makes sense. Another item laying in the mess was a tube of toothpaste, and squirted on the ground near Kyle's body, just maybe a foot and a half from his own foot, was toothpaste. Now, there was no indication that the room had been broken into, and one article does say that you could enter the room through a sliding glass or sliding wooden door, but that there was no forcible entry observed there. Police said it was difficult to tell if a struggle had taken place, and like I said before, Kyle's watch wasn't taken, and even though his wallet had been rifled through, investigators were skeptical that robbery was the motive behind this. There was also reportedly no blood found on any of the bathroom towels and no blood in the hallway or the exterior of the building. Now, the last thing I want to mention about the scene, which I really don't have a lot of details on, was there was a pair of nail clippers left there. And from what I've seen in my research, Kyle's wife didn't believe that those nail clippers belonged to him. Immediately after Kyle's murder, the Galesburg police chief, James Frakes, said the crime might be difficult to solve because it involves a, quote, transient situation. The Sheraton Motor Inn, where William Kyle was murdered, was located just off Interstate 74, meaning it would have been really easy for someone to commit the crime and get far from the scene using the interstate. Articles from this time period say investigators interviewed people staying in the surrounding rooms, Kyle's coworkers, his wife, and clients in the Galesburg area. And from what was gathered from interviews of other hotel guests, no one heard anything unusual coming from Kyle's room. And based on Chief Frakes' comment about it involving a transient situation, that makes me think that early on in the investigation, they didn't believe that the perpetrator was a guest of the hotel, but rather someone who was there and just left. Now, the immediate area surrounding the hotel was also searched with metal detectors. They were trying to find the murder weapon, but there was no luck. And I would love nothing more than to reconstruct the timeline of what William Kyle was doing before his murder, but there has just been so little reporting on this specific case. The only thing I have been able to find was that after checking into the motel sometime Tuesday afternoon, that he was last seen with a business client around 9 p.m. that Tuesday. And I haven't found any other information on where they were seen, what they were doing, nothing of that nature. Another article, though, published on June 27th, 1980 in the Quad City Times said that following an autopsy, the deputy coroner, George Peterson, said that Kyle had not been dead for a great length of time. So timeline-wise, he's last seen around 9 p.m. with a client. He's found around 1 p.m. the next day. Now, this June 27th article, though, does say that police were speculating that Kyle had left his room unlocked when he went to go get a soft drink, and that his attacker then got in and was waiting for him when he returned. So I don't know what information they have to come up with this very specific theory that he left the room unlocked to go get a soft drink, but I don't know. They have to have something. But I want to talk about the similarities between William Kyle's case and Rose and Roger's. Now remember, this case, William Kyle, is happening about 3 months before the murders of Rose and Roger, and the location, Galesburg, Illinois, is about 2 hours southeast of Williamsburg, Iowa. Let's start with the locks. Police are speculating that Kyle's room was left unlocked, which again goes to my rant in one of the first episodes in this series, that these hotel room doors might not have automatically locked like they do now. So there's the potential that the killer got into Kyle's room by just opening the door. Or again, maybe he knocked on the door and Kyle let him in. That is similar to what I had been thinking with Rose and Roger's case. With both cases, there were no signs of forced entry, so they were either let in or they walked right in through either an unlocked door or with a stolen key. Another similarity is the way they were murdered. Both William Kyle and Rose and Roger were struck multiple times in the back of the head and shoulders and neck with a hatchet or some sort of axe-like instrument. And in both cases, the murder weapon was never found. Now, one big difference is the positioning of their bodies. Rose and Roger were lying face down in the bed. William Kyle was face down but kneeling over the bed. But again, I think he was originally struck while laying face down on the pillow. Now, both William Kyle and Rose and Roger's hotel rooms were a mess. Stuff had been rifled through, drawers were opened, and in both cases, the rooms were described as having been ransacked. Both William Kyle and Roger Atkison's wallets had been, quote, rifled through. It appeared as though the contents of the wallets had been plucked out one by one and thrown onto the ground. Additionally, in both rooms, there was movement that you can see with the chairs, like just the regular stationary chairs that would have been sitting at either a table or a desk. In both cases, these chairs were placed in a way that makes it seem like someone had been sitting there beforehand. I will say this is a little less so with William Kyle's room, but you can tell there that the chairs had been moved. They weren't pulled up directly next to the bed like we saw in Rose and Roger's case, but they were moved a little bit. Now, the biggest similarity by far with both of these cases is relating to the toothpaste. With Rose and Roger's murders, toothpaste had been squirted into the bathtub, which is so strange. And you see at the scene of William Kyle's murder, toothpaste had been squirted on the floor right by his foot. This is such a strange detail that I really do not think can be ignored. And I really think that it is just the toothpaste. That is the sole piece of information that had investigators considering that these cases might be linked. And I mean, it's a really strong similarity, right? Like, it's just such a strange and peculiar thing. It's like, it would be a weird coincidence that two totally separate murders, I think, had toothpaste squirted at the scene. And lastly, what I want to highlight is the location of the hotels. Both the Holiday Inn and the Sheraton were located right off the interstate. Makes it very easy for someone to pop in and leave quickly, right? So with all these similarities, I think you can see why these cases were connected at the time and why they are still talked about. When you bring up one case, you generally bring up the other. What I didn't see in my research of reporting from that time period was a for sure statement from investigators saying that these cases were connected or weren't. They always just brought up the possibility that they were looking at each case thoroughly to try to find the similarities. But fast forward to 2019, when the episode of The DNA of Murder with Paul Holes comes out, That, I think, definitely refocused the investigation and reintroduced the idea that maybe Rose and Roger weren't murdered by someone they knew, but a serial killer, and the same man who had murdered William Kyle. This episode of the DNA of Murder with Paul Holes, I've brought it up a lot in this series so far. It was very informative on both Rose and Roger's case and William Kyle's case. And at the end of the episode, Paul Holes does give suggestions to the Galesburg detectives and recommends that they retest items for DNA. In the 80s, there was not really anything found, which isn't surprising, but with advancements in DNA technology we have today, I really think they might be able to find something. So it was recommended that they retest the towels, the nail clippers, and the toothpaste tube. Now, that episode came out in 2019. Today, I haven't seen anything on if those tests were ever done, if anything ever came of it. I have submitted a records request for this case specifically. I have sent a request in to the Illinois State Police. They did get back to me. They said they need a little more time. I'm not confident I'm going to get anything from them, but if I do, again, you all will be the first to know. One significant aspect of this episode, The DNA of Murder with Paul Holes, is that they name a suspect. And they believe that this man was responsible for the murder of William Kyle and potentially the murder of Rose and Roger. And that man's name was Raimundo Esparza. And in the end of the episode, they are really selling the idea that this man was responsible for the murder of William Kyle, for the murders of Rose and Roger, and potentially the murder of another man, killed in 1970 in Mississippi. Now, in next week's episode, we are going to dive into what we know about this 1970 case, what we know about Raimundo Esparza, and I think wrap up this series. So thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cardinal Crimes. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing, giving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast, and sharing this episode with others. You can find us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram with the handle @CardinalCrimes, and you can send us any case suggestions, questions, or topics you would like covered there or to our email, cardinalcrimes@gmail.com. Until next time, friends, take care of each other and take care of yourself. If you've ever thought about starting your own podcast, there's no better place to begin than with Buzzsprout. It's the platform I use, and it makes publishing, promoting, and tracking your episodes so easy, even if you're not tech savvy. Plus, they help you get listed in all the major directories like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. And here's the best part. When you sign up for a paid Buzzsprout plan using my affiliate link, you'll get $20 off, and you'll be supporting the show at the same time. Just head to the description of this episode to find the affiliate link. Now, let's get back to the episode.